Jesus knew something about you that the most powerful institution in human history spent centuries making sure you would never find out. Not a rumor, not a theory, a deliberate, documented teaching, buried, suppressed, and nearly erased, about the most intimate and misunderstood energy a human being carries inside them. Sexual energy, the very thing you were taught to be ashamed of. The very thing that, according to texts nearly 1,700 years old, Jesus called sacred. Think about that for a second. And here is what genuinely breaks me every time I sit with this. And I don't care if you are a man or a woman watching this right now, because this was done to all of us. That quiet guilt you feel, the shame that creeps in when you are simply, fully, honestly human. Where did that actually come from? Because you were not born with it. No one is. I was not born with it either. It was placed inside us, carefully, deliberately, by people who knew exactly what they were doing and exactly what they were taking from you. And what they took was this: the understanding that the energy running through you is not your weakness. It is not your sin. It is, according to these hidden texts, your most profound and sacred resource, one that Jesus taught his closest circle to understand, master, and transform. I stumbled onto this, and I could not look away. What these 1,700-year-old manuscripts reveal about what Jesus actually taught will not just surprise you. It will make you question everything about his real message, about the body you live in, and about the shame you have been carrying your whole life that was never yours to carry. Here's something that most people never stop to ask. How did we actually get the version of Jesus' teachings that exists today? Think about it. Jesus lived and spoke in the 1st century. The Bible, as you know, it was not assembled immediately. It went through councils, committees, political decisions, and powerful institutions. Most notably, a famous council in the 4th century where church leaders gathered and made deliberate choices about which texts would be included and which ones would be removed. Removed, not lost. Removed. And then, almost like history itself was trying to correct something, ancient texts began surfacing. Scrolls and bound manuscripts hidden in caves and desert jars, some dating back nearly 1,700 years, containing gospels that never made it into the Bible. Gospels that claimed to carry the actual words and private teachings of Jesus to his closest circle. When scholars and historians first translated these documents, the reaction from established religious institutions was not excitement. It was alarm, because what these texts described did not match the version of Jesus the world had been given for over 1,000 years. These were not fringe writings. These were carefully preserved, deeply theological texts. The Gospel of Thomas, the Gospel of Philip among them, written in a tradition that treated Jesus as a teacher of inner transformation, not just moral rule following. And at the center of some of the most striking passages was something nobody expected: a radically different teaching about the human body, desire, and what many scholars now call sacred energy. Ask yourself, if these teachings were harmless, why go through the trouble of burying them? Before I go further, I need to make sure we're talking about the same thing. Because the moment most people hear the words sexual energy, their mind goes exactly where centuries of shame programming trained it to go. So let me reset that completely. Sexual energy, in its truest and most ancient definition, is not about physical acts. It is not about lust. It is not about sin or indulgence or anything the word sexual has been reduced to in modern culture. Sexual energy is life force energy. It is the same energy that causes a seed to split open and become a tree. It is the raw creative current that runs through every living thing. Ancient wisdom traditions across the world, from early Gnostic Christian circles to the philosophers of Greece, to the mystery schools of Egypt, all pointed to the same understanding: that human beings carry within themselves a fundamental creative energy, and that this energy is the closest thing to divine power that a person can access while alive in a physical body. The Greeks called aspects of it pneuma. Early Christian mystics called it spirit or light. The specifics differ, but the core understanding is identical. This energy creates. It is generative. It is the force behind art, vision, breakthrough, love, and spiritual ascension. Here is my honest opinion on this. I think the reduction of this concept to something purely physical, something to be ashamed of or suppressed without understanding, is one of the greatest acts of spiritual theft in human history. You are handed a diminished version of something enormous, and most people never even realize it. The question these ancient texts force you to ask is this: what if Jesus knew exactly what this energy was and taught people how to use it? This is the part that changes everything. In the Gospel of Philip, one of those ancient manuscripts that survived centuries of suppression, there is a concept described that scholars have spent decades trying to fully decode. It is called the bridal chamber. Now, the moment you read that, your conditioned mind might jump to a physical interpretation. That is exactly the reaction the text anticipates and moves beyond. In the esoteric teaching of the bridal chamber, the union being described is not primarily physical. It is the union of opposites within a single human being. The merging of the inner masculine and feminine principles, the analytical and the intuitive, the active and the receptive, into a state of wholeness. A state of completion. The Gospel of Philip states it plainly. The Lord did everything in a mystery. Everything. The teachings were layered. There was a surface meaning for the crowd and a deeper meaning for those ready to receive it. And what was that deeper meaning around the body and its energy? That the physical was not to be despised. That the body was not a cage for the soul. It was a vehicle for transformation. That the energy flowing through you is not a weakness or a temptation to be crushed. It is a resource to be understood, refined, and directed. The Gospel of Thomas, which opens with these extraordinary words, "Whoever finds the interpretation of these sayings will not taste death," contains a Jesus who speaks almost entirely in riddles about inner states, about light within a person, about the kingdom not being above or below, but inside you. Inside you, not in a building, not after you die, inside the living, breathing, embodied you. And several passages in these texts describe what happens when a person becomes divided against themselves, when they war against their own nature instead of understanding it. The result, according to these teachings, is not holiness. It is fragmentation, spiritual poverty, a person cut off from their own source. Now contrast that with what mainstream religious doctrine spent centuries teaching, that the body is suspicious, that desire is dangerous, that your natural energy is something to be confessed and suppressed. I'll let you sit with that contrast for a moment, because someone made a decision, at a specific point in history, in specific rooms with specific political motivations, to take teachings about mastery and wholeness and replace them with teachings about shame and control. And that decision has shaped how billions of people see themselves for over 1,000 years. That is not a small thing. That is the architecture of human self-perception, deliberately constructed. Now here is where it gets even more fascinating, because everything these ancient texts described, the idea that this energy is creative, powerful, and directable, modern neuroscience and psychology are now beginning to confirm from a completely different angle. Your brain, when aroused by desire of any kind, releases a cascade of neurochemicals, most notably dopamine, that prime you for motivation, focus, and creative output. This is not metaphor. This is measurable biology. The same neurological system activated by sexual arousal is the system responsible for ambition, artistic creation, and the drive to build something meaningful. And here is what strikes me deeply about this. Jesus, in those hidden texts, never told you to destroy this energy. He taught his closest circle to understand it first, to become aware of it, to stop being unconsciously dragged by it and start consciously directing it. That is not the language of religion. That is the language of mastery. And now, 2,000 years later, science is using different words to say the exact same thing. Psychologists have long studied a concept called sublimation, first seriously explored by Sigmund Freud, the founder of psychoanalysis, who spent decades mapping the hidden architecture of the human mind. Sublimation is the process of taking raw instinctual energy and redirecting it into higher creative or intellectual output. Freud himself considered it one of the most sophisticated psychological capacities a human being could develop. And when historians look closely at some of the most remarkably prolific figures across history, painters, architects, philosophers, scientists, a striking pattern emerges. Many of them spoke openly about periods of deliberate abstinence and energy conservation that they directly connected to their greatest creative breakthroughs. This is not coincidence. This is the same truth the ancient texts were pointing at, arriving through the language of science instead of scripture. The ancients didn't have fMRI machines. They didn't have neurochemistry, but they observed. They paid extraordinary attention to cause and effect within the human body over centuries. And what they recorded, we are now measuring in laboratories. The knowledge was never magic. It was always just advanced self-understanding. So if this knowledge existed, if Jesus reportedly taught that your body's energy is sacred and powerful, then why does almost nobody know this? Here is the uncomfortable answer. Because a population that is ashamed of itself is extraordinarily easy to manage. Think about what shame does to a person. It creates an internal division. You are constantly at war with yourself. You spend enormous mental and emotional energy on guilt, confession, self-condemnation. You feel fundamentally broken. And a person who feels fundamentally broken does not step into power. A person who feels fundamentally broken looks outside themselves for salvation, for permission, for authority. Now ask yourself, who benefits from that? Institutions that position themselves as the bridge between you and the divine. They benefit enormously when you believe you cannot access the divine on your own. When you believe your own body is an obstacle rather than a gateway. The teaching that got buried, the one in those ancient texts, said something radically threatening to that structure. It said the kingdom is inside you. It said your body is a temple. It said that union and wholeness are available to you directly, through understanding yourself. That kind of teaching doesn't create dependence. It creates sovereign, self-aware human beings. And I think, this is genuinely my own belief, that is exactly why it was buried. Not because it was wrong, but because it was dangerous to the wrong people. So what do you do with this? Now I am not going to hand you 1,700 years of hidden wisdom and then leave you standing there with nothing to do with it. The first and most foundational practice these teachings point toward is awareness before action. Most people experience this energy as an impulse that immediately demands a response. The ancient teaching and the modern psychological understanding both say the same thing. The gap between impulse and response is where your power lives. When you feel this energy arise, instead of immediately acting on it or immediately suppressing it with shame, you observe it. You breathe into it. You recognize it as what it actually is, raw creative fuel. And you ask, where do I want this to go? This is not repression. Repression is what centuries of shame culture taught you. This is something completely different. This is conscious direction. You are not killing the fire. You are deciding what to build with it. Ancient breathwork traditions connected to these mystical teachings used breath specifically as the bridge between physical energy and higher mental states. Slow, deliberate, deep breathing during moments of intense energy activates the parasympathetic nervous system, moves you out of pure impulse, and opens the prefrontal cortex, the part of your brain responsible for creativity, long-term thinking, and visionary insight. People who begin applying this, even without knowing the ancient context, report the same things consistently: sharper mental clarity, an unexpected surge in creative output, deeper emotional stability in relationships, and a growing sense of internal authority. Like something that was scattered inside them is finally pointing in one direction. I'll be direct with you. When I first encountered these ideas and started sitting with them seriously, something shifted in how I carried myself. Not because I became perfect at it, but because for the first time, I stopped seeing this energy as a problem to be managed and started seeing it as a resource to be respected. That reframe alone is worth everything. So let me bring you back to where we started. That voice, the one that whispered, "You shouldn't feel that way," the last time you were simply, honestly human. I want you to ask yourself one final question. Did that voice ever actually belong to you? Or was it handed to you by a system, built over centuries, through deliberate decisions made in rooms you were never invited into? A system that needed you to feel broken, so you would never realize how whole you actually are. The texts that were buried for 1,700 years suggest that the actual teaching was never about shame. It was about sovereignty. It was about understanding that the most powerful energy in the universe runs through you right now, and that the difference between a person who is ruled by it and a person who is transformed by it is nothing more than awareness. Your energy is not your sin. It never was. It is your most sacred inheritance. And someone spent a very long time making sure you didn't know that. Now you do. And I want to know, did this shift something in you? Drop one word in the comments right now. Just one word that describes exactly what you are feeling in this moment. I read every single one. Share this with one person in your life who needs to hear this today, because this is the kind of truth that changes people, and some people are waiting for someone like you to send it to them. If you are not subscribed yet, do that right now, because what I am going to show you next goes even deeper than this. If this cracked something open for you, if you felt something shift while watching this, then you already know what this teaching is pointing at. It's not in a book. It's not in a church. It's the thing you just felt. Think about that. And if you want to go deeper, you know where to find me.